What is going on, everyone? Welcome to this very, very special live stream. Yes, this session is completely live. We want to welcome everyone to the stream hosted by Interpres. My name is Ron Eddings. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Hacker Valley Media, and we have an exciting topic today. This topic is going to change cybersecurity as we know it. This topic is continuous threat exposure management. And that is all what Interpres does. They really help organizations defend against the threats that matter most. And to kick off this conversation, we have a very special guest and also one of the founders of Interpres Security. We have Michael Jenks. Michael, thank you for hosting the stream, inviting me, and welcome to your very own show.
Oh, totally. Thank you, Ron. And thank you for the warm introduction, man. I like how you hype it up.
Oh, yeah.
I like it.
I love this space, and I'll tell you why. I focus on attack surface management for quite a while. And with attack surface management, it was very helpful for things like asset inventory, finding coverage gaps. But there was also this gap that we had with ASM, attack surface management, when it comes to finding which vulnerabilities to patch, finding out which vulnerabilities the adversaries are using. And that's exactly what you all do with Interpres Security.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a combination, as you mentioned, right? This CTEM space, continuous threat exposure management, and there's a whole bunch of disparate tools. One of them being, attack surface management tools, and really that's what we're addressing, and this whole CTEM space is addressing. Is there's a lot of fantastic tools out there, but that information is siloed and inactionable. So along with ASM, there's a few other tools in there that we'll talk about, I'm sure, but you hit the nail on the head for sure.
So let's jump into it. But first, speak a little bit about yourself. And I think that's also going to help myself and the audience learn a bit more about Interpres Security. So, what's your background and how does that relate to this space of CTEM?
Yeah. So background, man, been a long career in the IT space. I'm probably going on 25 years now. Started off at a dial-up ISP, landed a gig early on at L3 Communications. And that's really where just learned a whole bunch of fundamental, foundational skill sets with regard to network security, system administration, just overarching, IT infrastructure and how it all came together. I then found myself downturn in the economy, realized that Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, is not exactly Silicon Valley. When the job market got a little scary, put my name out there and, found that, man, if you had information security skills and clearance, which I received at L3 Communications, Maryland is essentially, the place to be, right? Tons of jobs there, tons of opportunity. So, found my way down in Maryland, did the DC, Maryland circuit for a few years, 3-letter agencies, et cetera, got into security automation, and then, wound up had an opportunity to start a company named Adapt4, previous to Interpres, down here in Charleston, South Carolina, that we were able to stand up what's called a cybersecurity service provider for the federal government, Department of Defense, which is essentially the equivalent of a managed detection and response capability in the commercial world, and just really perfected the trade craft of security operations, red teaming, et cetera. So long career. It's been fun. And it continues to be fun. I mean, it's never ending, right? It's ever evolving, ever changing, never a dull moment in InfoSec.
So when we met, you mentioned that you had a background in red teaming. And one thing that caught my attention is you described your former business when you were running it as you were wrecking the adversary. So how does red teaming fit into this? And, how were you wrecking the adversary back then?
Well, shoot, it actually started with the adversary wrecking us, right? So, as part of standing up, the operation for the government, you have to go through an accreditation. So that's an audit where The auditors come in, they ensure that you're doing all the right things. I's dotted, T's crossed, all the tools deployed, policies, procedures. And, we ended up scoring 100%. I mean, it was the best score ever in the Department of Defense. So we're all like, high fives all around. But that particular year, they introduced a new aspect of the assessment, and that was being blindly assessed by an NSA red team. And we detected 0 of their activity. So on one aspect, 100% best score ever on the compliance drill, but real world tactical, detect and respond, big fat goose egg. And it was essentially my job to fix it. So, we started off essentially calling up the vendors. I'm not going to call any out, but, think of your favorite vendor on the, EDR space and network security space and, all the things. And I said, hey guys, what gives? We just got wrecked by the adversary. And, they said, oh, sorry that happened, but don't worry about it. We'll be able to detect that stuff in our next release. And it was at that moment that I realized that I had no idea really where I was protected, where I was not, where to focus. And I was completely blindly trusting these vendors to just handle it for me. And obviously that wasn't the case. I mean, we we were just proven that we didn't have it all together. So, we started down the, let's say breach and attack simulation route, purple teaming route, where we essentially attacked every one of these tools and knew, no kidding, what would they detect and what they wouldn't. And then essentially we knew where the gaps were from a prioritized sense, right? So then we created a Tiger team to focus on, what could we implement from a let's say a tooling configuration, from a additional security logging capability, additional detection logic to detect those gaps. So after going through that exercise, through over the course of a few years, you have to be reaccredited every 3 years, right, to keep that operation up and running. So the auditors came back, and this time we passed with 100% again on the paperwork drill. High fives. But this time we detected the red team within the first hour of compromise. We're able to reverse engineer some binaries and just completely wreck their C2 infrastructure, which was super satisfying. They came back 3 years later. We actually detected them on essentially a white card pivot where some red teams get together. That's like, hey, I have access to this. You want to provide me access, and we caught them on that pivot. So much so that the red team director called me up and he said, man, that was pretty incredible. But man, we just spent about 6 months developing this exercise. How about you just pretend you didn't see us and let us continue on with the evaluation? So, I gotta say, super satisfying and validating because we knew it worked. And then, obviously, through that process, of implementing a threat-informed defense methodology, really, various APT, threat actors, throughout the year. So, really cool experience.
That's what I love about life, and that's what I love about cybersecurity is that when you kind of have like one small experience, everything can change, especially, like I said, in cybersecurity. You had this former company and you were wrecking the adversary, and then it led to starting Interpres Security, and you have some great co-founders. I got to meet Nick Lanta and also Ian as well. And what I think is really great about you all and what you're doing with Interpres Security is it's threat-informed defense, but looking at things like the adversary, looking at things like vulnerabilities. And with this space now emerging, there's other companies that do similar things. And so much so that Gartner said, hey, we have to create a category to really fit this type of idea into a bucket to make it maybe a bit more accessible. People type in things like how to fix vulnerabilities into Google. So Gartner created this category called Continuous Threat Exposure Management, CTEM for short. whenever there's a new category that emerges, I think, defining it is very important, and you all are helping trailblaze and define this category. So how would you describe this CTEM space? What's the definition of it?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the impetus for Interpres, right, is taking all of the work that we were doing manually at the previous company and productizing it, because we knew everybody has this problem. So, we came out of stealth in January of last year. And lo and behold, Gartner, establishes this, writes this paper on this thing called continuous threat exposure management. And, when you look at it, that's exactly what we're doing. There just wasn't a label for all of that. So, what is continuous threat exposure management? There's the Gartner paper, and I think it'll be ever evolving, ever expanding. But, my definition is it is the unification of various tool sets and disparate tools to help organizations understand which exposures, and by that I mean vulnerability, security tool deployment, configuration, public facing assets, lack of detection coverage, all of these things that are the most threatening for your business, right? Because organizations are realizing that they can't protect themselves against every cyber threat that's out there. So there needs to be a holistic understanding of the organization's threat exposure, and then take prioritized actions to burn down identified exposures against the threats that matter most to them, simply because there's not enough time and resources to keep up with it all.
Right. And, I mentioned that my background is in the ASM space. I, used to work for an ASM vendor, also worked for some SOAR vendors. And I think one of the cool things about CTEM is it kind of takes the best of many worlds and makes it a lot easier and manageable. Like when I was working in SOAR, I had to, and for anyone that doesn't know SOAR, it's security, orchestration, automation, and response. When I was working in that space, we had to do everything manually. So someone would buy the product, and then we would have to, the customer success team would come in and we would tell them, put this step here, then put that step here. But with CTEM, it's kind of all out of the box. Also, Jenks did mention he'd spent some time in Maryland. That's where I'm from. He's in South Carolina now. I'm in Austin, Texas. This session's live, like I mentioned. Looks like we have about 30 people on this stream live. Drop a comment. Where are you joining from? We would love to bring that up on the screen and also say hello to you. But going back to CTEM for a second, CTEM and ASM and SOAR, I think what powers these spaces, what powers these categories is integrations. And I would imagine that integrations is a huge piece of CTEM. But on top of that, there's also the threat intelligence component as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. Where does threat intelligence fit into this equation?
Yeah, threat intelligence is one of many pieces of the recipe, right? I mean, continuous threat, right? So threat's got to be a big component of CTEM, exposure management. So there's, I would say, three categories that make all of these integrations tough, like you mentioned, right? You have technical challenges, right? So you have all of these tool sets. You have ASM, you have breach and attack simulation, you have vulnerability management, you have your SIM, your EDR, right? Your network security sensors, etc. They're all very super complex technologies, but they're siloed in their own ecosystems, right? So that's tough. That makes that analytical layer tough. There's strategic aspects of implementing CTEM with all of these different tool sets. And that's, again, where threat intelligence comes in, Ron. It's that prioritization factor from a strategic sense, because there's a ton of threat intelligence that's released every day, every month. I mean, it's incredible the amount of information that's flying at you. So, I mean, part of that strategic component of integrating threat intel into that CTEM program is helping you prioritize and understand if it even applies to you. That's step one. Step two is, if it does apply, right, do I have exposure to it? And I would say the last piece that's really tough about, implementing CTEM, a CTEM program, is that analytical component where, again, from all of those disparate tool sets, disparate teams, right? You have generally, an advisory is released. That threat intelligence team has to download that report, parse out all the information, hand it to an ops team. From the vulnerability, do we have any exposures? From the security detection capabilities, do we have it? Are we collecting the proper visibility? Do we have any tool mitigations, et cetera? So right now, all of that's being done in spreadsheets, right? Which is not ideal. So, there's got to be a better way. And I feel, Interpres is that better way. But
what have been the challenges so far with building?
With building Interpres?
Yeah.
Yeah. You actually nailed it. Similar to a SOAR capability, right? The way Interpres works is it's that analytical layer. It's that intelligence layer that sits on top of all your tooling and integrates them all. So you get that, single pane of glass, holistic view. So, as far as building, what's the challenge? It's definitely been, we're supporting over, 60 tool sets, right? So we're integrating into all the EDRs, all the threat intelligence platforms, all the SIMs, et cetera. So that's been, definitely a challenge of building.
Right before we went live, I asked the team, I said, hey, how would you visually show the challenge and kind of the current landscape of security automation and vulnerability management and, many other technologies? And your team had an image on the ready. So let's go ahead and pull that up and walk us through it.
Yeah. If you look in the middle there, right, that's a figure of what represents a human. And you have all of these technologies, external attack surface management, breach and attack simulation, you have manual red team assessments, vulnerability programs, et cetera. Right. So, like I mentioned earlier, as an advisory, let's say it comes out, from CISA or, CrowdStrike, et cetera, that human in the middle there, right, has to not only understand, what, if that breach even pertains, to my organization. And then once it does, okay, well, now I have to understand all of these technologies, go gather that information. And oh, by the way, like what you're seeing here, that's not everything, right? This is more or less what's in Gartner's, definition of CTEM. But, we're thinking it's expanded beyond that because all of these tool sets are providing that, here's some information, here's some data, right? Here's some, opening in your attack surface. But the next step is, so what? Like, what do I do about it? And really, that's where we're taking that additional step, right? To bring all of this together. So you have that so what factor.
Right. Yeah, this is insightful and interesting because I would imagine that anyone that's practicing cybersecurity, that is in the weeds and in the thick of it all, is dealing with these stovepipes. And that's, whether you're using automation or not, like maybe 2 out of these many tools or capabilities are connected, but are they all connected and integrated and speaking and working with you, the end user, let alone each other? So let's go to the next one because, there was a kind of another diagram that the team shared. And I wanted you to, help me understand this. Is this implying that Interpres connects to all these capabilities? Is it, or what is it describing exactly?
Yeah. So if you look at the middle of this, right, this figure, this diagram, really Interpres is that piece, that intelligence layer, right? That's connecting via read-only API to all of these different technologies that you already own, by the way, right? We're talking about your endpoint detection response capability. We're talking about all of your vulnerability scanners from the endpoint to the cloud, all of your SIM, all of your threat intel, right? So as these advisories are released, right, we're essentially automating, the crappy part of that analysis, right? You have super highly intelligent people, in the cyberspace, right? From these threat intel analysts, the detection engineers, right? Super sophisticated people. And, they're playing go fetch me a rock every day, right? Because as these reports are coming out, they have to parse these things out and log in. It's just this repetitive motion that leads to a lot of burnout, right? Because the amount and velocity of this threat intel, these breach reports, et cetera, that are flying at us. I mean, dude, I was an ops, man. Like that'll crush your spirit to live. Like after, doing that 24/7, gig for a while. So really, what we're trying to assist is automating, all of that manual effort to provide that analysis, of your exposure with that ecosystem. So again, to the threats that matter most to you. So we're able to look at, as these threat intelligence reports are released, we're looking at victimology data, right? Industry vertical targeted, what geolocation is targeted, type of data they're going after, right? So again, even though there are a ton of reports, I would say for the most part, a lot of them don't even apply to you. So step one is, does this even apply? Then step two is, okay, if it does, right, do I have any exposure to it? And we're automating, helping you understand if you have any asset exposure. Do you have the proper tool configs? Are you collecting the proper security logs, right? So we're automating the sucky part that allows you to really focus on, what you were hired to do instead of going to fetch me a rock, right?
I love the concept, and I would imagine that anybody that is interested in bringing order to all this chaos would be very excited about the space of CTEM and even Interpres security. But when it comes to security practitioner, a lot of us are skeptical before signing up for a demo, before trying out a free trial. What is the onboarding going to be like? So maybe walk us through. You have Interpres in your environment. What are the steps that you're going to take, and also what is the information that the platform is going to provide back?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question, and truly one of our strengths, right? So we're a SaaS delivered application. We do have the ability to deploy in hybrid environments as well, where we would have the SaaS, but also an on-prem collector for any tool sets that you have, and also the ability to deploy in private AWS clouds. But as far as that initial stand-up, super seamless. I mean, we've had customers up and running within 20 minutes and delivering value. So really the biggest hurdle, right, is your organization would have to establish read-only API access to your security tooling. But once those accounts are created, we simply just pop in those API creds in the Interpres, and it's up and running and analyzing data essentially instantaneously. So, what could you expect? Even just to, spin the wheels on it, is at the very least, you'll have a threat-informed baseline of your entire environment and exposure. And that would be within 24 hours. I would say I would encourage you, obviously, because the topic of discussion is continuous, right? Threat exposure management. So even though, let's say I, pop Interpres in, or, I go through the manual exercise even of, hey, I got this, exposure report. Do I have exposure? And let's say, we come to the conclusion that, we're all good. We have nothing to do, right? That doesn't mean tomorrow, right, some system administrator doesn't spin up some VM that's been dormant for a while, right, and reintroduces that attack vector into the environment. So, that's another aspect of Interpres is we're continuously analyzing the relationships between threat and defense because they're ever evolving. I think everybody can nod their heads and agree, hey, you have this threat landscape out there, ever changing, ever evolving. But what people don't think about often is how often their defense capabilities also change and shift. That affects your overall exposure to that ever evolving threat landscape.
Right. Absolutely. With what's going on in the world right now, there's things like CISA out there that's really helping organizations get an understanding, get a grasp of some of those critical vulnerabilities that might be targeting critical infrastructure. But I have heard that addressing all those vulnerabilities that are shared by CISA is challenging, and the NVD, National Vulnerability Database, has a backlog of enriching all this information. So does Interpres help with things like the vulnerabilities that are shared, the disclosures that are shared by CISA and even NVD, for example?
I mean, absolutely is the easy answer. The more in-depth answer is, from a vulnerability perspective, really our goal is to allow organizations understand the exposure that they have to, trending campaigns, adversarial campaigns that would target an organization like them to help prioritizing patching efforts. So again, not all CVEs are created equal, right? There's some that have already been exploited out in the wild, right? That moves it up the priority list. We're taking into account, EPSS, CVSS, but also again, really it's that threat context around, and again, it goes back to, we have a bunch of customers that have upward of 50 to 100,000 vulnerabilities in their enterprise environments, which, oh, by the way, is not uncommon. But again, just providing that additional context as far as, yes, you have these vulnerabilities. Yes, they've been exploited in the wild, but oh, by the way, right, there's 6 active campaigns that target organizations like yours that are exploiting these particular CVEs. You have, let's say 1,000 assets that have that exposure. Some of them are public facing. Some of them don't have an EDR deployed to them, right? We're providing that context to help, reducing that exposure, from that holistic sense.
Right. There's, people tuning in live to this. I wanted to drop in the opportunity to ask Jenks questions. One of the things that is most inspiring for me being on webinars and live streams like this is I have the opportunity to shape the future of cybersecurity and the space of CTEM by asking questions, asking, providers like Interpres Security the hard questions like, do you cover this? Do you cover that? And maybe I look at things like from the lens of an investor. I've heard a lot of VCs ask startup founders about the team. So what makes you all the right team for the job? I heard your background as a red teamer that helped out the 3-letter agencies, but what about the rest of the team? What kind of skills and perspectives do they bring to the table?
Yeah, I mean, we brought in Nick Lanta. I mean, that guy has quite the background, right? He initially was the founder of NetWitness. I'm sure some of you may have heard of that before. Yeah. I mean, it was like the de facto network forensics sensor back in the day. And he's had quite the career. I mean, he was founding chairman of eCentire. He, had a stint at Fidelis. Man, he's just got a lot of great leadership experience in this commercial realm. We also just have a team that's made up of startup DNA, from Landcope to Splunk to Cisco, et cetera. So a lot of innovation that was brought to the market, and then just a whole bunch of what I would say complete badasses from a security ops perspective that have felt the pain of doing all of this manually. That they're on that product side that's helping us shape the look and the feel and the function of that product to really make it useful and valuable to those end users.
Yeah, love that. I love the team, and also NetWitness is one of the first closed source like vendor solutions that I ever used and heard of joining the field of cybersecurity. So big kudos to you all for having such a legendary CEO and also a partner in crime of a co-founder on your team. With things like vulnerabilities, going back to that for a second, I've heard that it takes teams quite a bit of time to figure out which vulnerabilities to tackle first. And you said that Interpres helps prioritize, and also that you get to help organizations onboard in less than an hour. So what is that time saving? I think that's always like one of the value props of a cybersecurity product is, hey, we're going to take this many days, hours, weeks into minutes or less time. So what have you heard from your research?
Yeah. Feedback directly from our customers, right? So this process of taking, let's take a CISA advisory for an example, right? The process of taking one of these advisories, parsing out the information, handing that to a vulnerability management team to understand vulnerability exposure, understanding, working with the security ops team from a detection, from a visibility, from a mitigation perspective. That process, feedback directly from our customers, bigger the environment, bigger the issue, but anywhere from 3 days to 6 weeks, 6 weeks, right? Just to understand exposure before they move into remediation. So, we're able to drive that down into instantaneously providing that analysis that allows organizations to pivot directly into, okay, we have this exposure. Here's a prioritized set of actions to drive down that exposure risk in my environment immediately. So, that's just one aspect of it, right? So, I guess another thing to kind of point out, right? That's one advisory, right? There's like 800 of these things that are released every year from CISA alone, let alone, all of these other vendors that have their own advisories and breach reports, et cetera. So again,
it's impossible then. Like you can't, like if it takes 6 weeks and there was 800, then you just don't go through them all.
There's no way. I mean, you have to pick and choose, right? So, we're basically combing through them all, right? And then pointing out the ones that would apply to you, given your organization's threat profile, and then, allowing you to take, move right into remediation action. Again, do the things that you were hired to do, not go fetch me a rock, right? So again, it really helps with burnout as well, because again, man, you have some of the most fascinating and just brilliant people that I've worked with in my career, are these security operations folks. They're incredible, and and they're getting paid very, very well. And then from a leadership perspective, you got to step back and think like, man, so we're paying Bob over here, X amount, and he's spending 25% of his time carving out, IOCs and TTPs out of reports and like go and fetch me a rock of various tool sets, et cetera. So, we're really, again, pain that we felt ourselves, where we're just trying to, automate that away so you could focus on, what you were hired to do.
Oh, yeah. When I worked at Intel Corporation, I was doing threat intel, but more so like the threat intel automation and engineering. And part of my responsibility was to look at things like threat reports, pull out the IOCs. That IOCs back in like 2017 were the thing. Like you had to look at IOCs, and then you had to match the IOCs to your SIM or look in your case management solution and see if there were any hits. And that could be an indicator of you have been breached or compromised. But now IOCs aren't valuable or as valuable as they used to be. That's no secret. And with something like CTEM, it's almost like you're taking this new lens of threat intelligence. And you use the term threat-informed defense. So you're kind of like fusing threat intelligence and threat-informed defense all together. And it makes me wonder, what is the future of threat intelligence from your perspective?
I mean, really, what we're pointing out is that integration layer between threat intelligence teams and ops teams. It's been difficult, in the past to really make that threat intelligence actionable. So, really, what we're doing is fusing those two together, right? We're fusing together, threat intelligence, security operations, vulnerability, vulnerability management, defense surface management, which is, what we, a new aspect that we're bringing into the fold, right? There's attack surface management, but there's also this aspect of defense surface management, which is continuously analyzing your readiness across all your tool sets, et cetera. So I think to answer your question, Ron, is, what's the future of threat intelligence? It is this continuous, transformation and blending of all of these aspects, which essentially is CTEM. So I think CTEM ultimately is the future of threat intelligence and how it will be implemented within these organizations.
I 100% agree. When I was doing threat intelligence, I felt like I was only useful to cybersecurity teams because like I was giving out IOCs, I was providing IOCs to our security solutions. But with this, you're almost taking the information that you know about the adversary and applying it towards the business at large. You're applying it towards things like vulnerabilities. You're applying it towards optimization opportunities. And you're also applying it to the CISO. I've seen the Interpres product, so I would encourage anyone to check it out. It's worth the view because it's one of the first solutions that I've seen. The space of CTEM and Interpres included. The space of CTEM is the first solution that I've seen where it is a CISO dashboard. A lot of CISOs use Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, like you were mentioning. That's probably your biggest competitor when you're on demo calls. You ask them, hey, what do you use? I'm sure that you hear all the time, we use a spreadsheet. And I've seen the product. It gives you an overlook and a view on, hey, you might be exposed to this specific adversary. That's what your stakeholders are going to respond wisely to is, hey, this adversary targets our industry or our vertical, and we have a vulnerability. It becomes a no-brainer to focus on that piece, and it's bubbled up right to you on the dashboard.
Yeah, Ron, thanks for pointing that out. Really, again, from the pain that we've felt, being in security operations, it's, always answering the mail to leadership on, why what we're doing matters or what, impact with what we're doing matters. So with Interpres, we really set out to allow the organization to quantitatively understand. And when I say quantitatively, I mean, what progress have we made against the top adversaries that would target us? How quickly do we respond and burn down exposure to trending campaigns? What, from a vulnerability perspective, am I driving those metrics down or that exposure down in a systematic sense, and why? So we're allowing the security teams, the practitioners, to really bubble that information up with the context as to here's what we're doing and here is how it impacted, right, and reduced the exposure for our business. Again, I would say has always been a problem, right, with the technical teams, and then leadership maybe that's not so technical on communicating the value of all the good things that they're doing. So really, we enable that with our reporting function that really spells it out for that leadership.
I have a secret for everybody. There's been a lot of layoffs looking at 2020 to even now 2024. The best way to avoid that type of situation is to provide value. And I think bubbling this type of information up to your stakeholders, to your board, is the best way to keep your job secure. Show that value, show where you were at from like a vulnerability exposure standpoint, and then show where you've taken the organization. If you're able to show that at one point we were exposed to APT 29 and then tomorrow we're not, that's extremely valuable. And if anyone knows me that's on this stream now, they know that Hacker Valley loves quality. I'm all about quality. And one piece of quality is having organization and information, not only having a product, but having words that can describe all of this. You have a webinar here, but you also have created a white paper. When I asked the team, hey, how could the audience learn more? I'm going to be inviting people to this live stream. How could they learn more about this space? You all have created this white paper. So tell us a little bit about what someone could expect if they were to check this out.
Yeah, I mean, it really, this was written like last year sometime, and it was very timely because, like I mentioned, Gartner was actually just released their paper about CTEM as well. But it's really goes into describing CTEM, its goals, right? Its hurdles of implementation, but then really how CTEM has a symbiotic relationship with threat-informed defense, and this continuous nature of being able to quantitatively measure, exposure, and being able to drive that down from a prioritized sense. Again, because there's only so many time and resources. We're very limited. All of these, especially in the IT shops, everybody's overworked, overstressed. So it's allowing organizations to take that fundamental approach as to understanding what matters to them, and what they should be worried about from an adversary sense, understanding their exposure to it, but then being able to systematically drive down that exposure from a quantitative sense, to be able to measure it and show improvement over time. So that's a little sneak peek of what you'd be able to find in there.
Yeah, so I think it would only be right. There's we got the live viewers. They're interested in the space. They've stayed on to this point. How would they get started? What could they expect if they were to try out Interpres?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, super seamless, right? So after you establish the API access to your tools, again, read only. We're not going to change any configurations. We're just analyzing the metadata. But what you can expect is, at the very least, you'll have a baseline, a threat-informed baseline against top adversaries, top malware families, top adversarial techniques per MITRE attack. Any exposure that you have to any trending campaigns, and that'll give you that snapshot. You'll be able to download a report, and like I said, at the very least, it's a quick threat-informed defense assessment of your environment. But then again, from a continuous basis, which is where the value is at, because as I mentioned before, you have this shifting landscape between threat and defense, ever evolving, ever changing. So that continuous nature is super important. But at the very least, you get that baseline assessment.
Love that. Love that. I would, like I said, I've viewed the product. I've played with it. I've even created videos on it. So I would highly encourage everyone to check it out, book a demo with the Interpres team. A lot of the times you'll be speaking directly to the co-founder, Michael Jenks. So 'tis the season. Be sure to check them out. And wanted to ask one last question for you, Jenks. If someone wanted to be one step better, whether they're using Interpres security or not, at being continuous with this threat-informed defense cycle, what would your one piece of advice be to them?
Yeah. Check us out. I'm sorry. I don't know if there's any other tool set out there that's doing this in an automated fashion. And, it's like, who are we competing with? I mean, there's definitely, other companies that are doing snippets and pieces of this, but really nothing that I saw other than, manual effort and spreadsheets, which is just super painful. So I don't know. I mean, my advice, Ron, is to please just try out the demo. And, there's no cost. At the very least, you get that baseline exposure report. And I think you'll like it.
You said it best. There isn't anything that does this. And, that's why I'm here. I've tried it myself. I tried it through SOAR. I tried it through ASM. There really isn't. So you got to check out Interpres Security. Wanted to thank you, Jenks, for inviting me to moderate, host, and, be a great chauffeur for you all to introduce this space of continuous threat exposure management to the audience. And with that, we will see everyone next time.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Ron.